hopefully you've got a reasonable understanding of the sorts of resources that we created for whole school staff, as well as for student cyber leaders, as well as for classroom teachers and of course the students themselves. Now I'd like to describe for you the sort of training that we provided for each of those groups within the school. As you can see here, we probably the crown of our project was the student cyber leader training and coaching that we provided. This is quite a novel approach, and as you heard from Trish, required a number of very interesting activities that would engage young people. So we ran a 6-hour training in each of the years of the project, focusing on Year 10 students. A really interesting outcome was that in the second year of our project, when we were to train a second group of Year 10 students, the preceding year of students were not so keen to give up their role, which of course was another indication that this was a strategy that was working very effectively within these school environments. We also offered a training to the Pastoral Care team staff and the sort of whole school leaders within the school, and that was a 3-hour training that we offered in each of the years of the project. We trained classroom teachers. We visited them within their schools and gave them a sense of what those resources online were like and how they could access them and perhaps the ways that they could support students. We provided through the schools and largely through the student leaders parent education sessions to help parents understand the sort of content that was being addressed. And then we also provided ongoing support to help each of those groups to access the resources that we'd provided online, and where necessary we provided some in-school coaching. So at a very comprehensive level, we needed to work with each of those groups to make sure that they had a deep understanding of the approaches that we were recommending in an environment where many of these teachers felt that they didn't have the skills to address this content. And in fact, one of the ways that we tried to respond to school staff who told us that they really didn't feel confident or competent standing in front of students and talking about these issues is that we designed those online resources that I talked about a short while ago to be very much self-help, where the teacher was more of a facilitator rather than a teacher of content. So they set up the learning environment, the children were encouraged to be independent learners and to follow the content that suited their needs as best they could. The Cyber Friendly Schools project collected a lot of data to determine whether or not this program made a difference. As you can see from the diagram here, we collected a lot of data, and really our primary target group were the students themselves. So following that Year 8 cohort, that 13-year-old group of students, through Year 9 and through Year 10, with about just over 3,000 children at the start of the project, and that dropped to just under 3,000 by the end. We also collected data from staff, their use and satisfaction, their levels of self-efficacy related to implementing the resources. These were both whole school level staff as well as classroom teachers. In every school we had a coordinator who took on the role as the champion to implement or support the staff to implement the resources that we created. And we were very interested in their views about how the program was implemented and the sorts of actions that were taken. So we also were fortunate they were willing to complete a number of interviews through each year of the study. And last but not least, our cyber leaders provided us with much insight into what they thought were the issues that were working well within the school environment, as well as their feedback on the content and activities that we asked them to engage in. So in addition to collecting impact data, so did we make a difference on students' bullying or perpetration experiences, we were also very interested in the process of implementation so that we could learn how to improve the resources, how to rewrite them, which pieces needed to be included or excluded in a revision. And those data have been used to help us analyse both what should be continued in this resource, but also to help us work out what level of dose the students received to determine whether or not that level of dose made any difference for students. From students themselves, we focused very much on bullying behaviours, as you'll see when Therese is presenting shortly, that we focused on their overall experiences with bullying, so face-to-face sort of traditional forms of bullying as well as online bullying, and obviously perpetration as well. But we were also interested in predictors of those behaviours. So we measured other social and emotional indicators, things like their helping behaviour, the extent to which they felt connected, their friendship groups, peer support within that school environment. And also from the students, we were interested in their perception of what they received, so some process measures on what they were engaged in and what they thought about those activities. And amongst the student leaders and parents and teachers that I've already mentioned, we collected the implementation data and of course their sense of self-efficacy and their feedback on the resources themselves. As many of you would recognise, measuring bullying is pretty tricky. Many young people will report, once they are aware of bullying, that any incident that they have where they bump into each other might be considered bullying. So in this survey that we administered as part of the Cyber Friendly Schools project, we worked hard to define what we meant by bullying. So children needed to understand that it was something that happened again and again, so it was repeated, that there was intention to harm, that it wasn't accidental, that somebody was deliberately trying to hurt them, and that there was a power difference, that the person who was doing the bullying had more power over the person who was experiencing the bullying in a way that they weren't easily able to deal with it themselves. So these definitions gave us a more rigorous measure of what bullying was, and as you can see here, we used pictographs as well, or images of these behaviours to reinforce young people's understanding and our sense of what we were looking for when we talked about bullying experiences.